With this video I will show you how to create dynamic master detail pages. There will be 3 separate pages that the user can click through. For this project I have used employees as an example. Hi. My name is Ben Plessier and I am a fervent user of Wappler, just like most of you. This is what I intend to create. The site opens with a departments page. As previously stated, I have used an employees application, but this could very well be a product categories page. When I click on the button for the department, I am taken to the employees who are located in that department. In the case of products, this would be the products within the chosen category. When I again click on the button of the chosen employee, I get taken to the employee details page. In case of products, this would show the details of the product. I always start with the backend. The reason for this is that a well-organized database and set of queries is the backbone of any dynamic project. Once this has been done, creating the front end should be smooth sailing. This is the database structure that I will be using. This is a modified version of a sample database obtained from sqltutorial.org. I will leave the link below in case you want to follow along. Departments will be the first query that I will be creating. This query will include inner joins for locations and countries. Employees is the second query that I will be creating. This table will include an inner join to show the job title. These 2 queries will cover the first 2 pages of the project. For the employee details page, I will create single queries for employee, job, manager, and department. Needless to say, I start by creating a database connection. This is done in the Workflows panel under Globals. I right-click Database Connection and choose Add Database Connection. I add the information in the dialog. In my case, this is a MariaDB database located in a local WAMP folder. To check the connection, I open the Database Manager panel where I see the tables as shown in the diagram. Back in the Workflows panel, I right-click API. I create a folder called Employees. It is important to note that proper housekeeping is a requirement. In this example, I have just the single server action. If this was a real website, there would be a multitude of server actions, making tracking a difficult task if not properly organized. Inside the folder I create a server action with a rather long name. In keeping with what I just said regarding housekeeping, this needs to be a descriptive name that means something when you look back at the project in 5 years' time. I know that I will be filtering the employees table. The value of the filter will come as a GET request from the browser. To facilitate this, I create a GET variable called filter. Next, I will create a database query for the departments page. Refreshing our memory, we see that we need the name of the department, the street address, city, postcode, state and country. Back in Wappler, I right-click Steps and choose Database Actions. In the panel, I choose Database Query. Under Properties, I add a meaningful name for the query. In the Query Builder, I add the Departments table and select all of the columns. This supplies the name of the department and a number for the location. To get the location, I need to add the Locations table. I choose inner join as the type and Wappler has cleverly chosen the fields that form the relationship. Now you may ask, why an inner join? The explanation lies outside the scope of this video. I will leave a link below that will take you to SQL Shack. There all will be explained. Notice that I have not selected all of the table columns. It is important to note that I have left location ID out. This is because the departments table already location ID. If I were to include this a second time, the query will get confused. All that is left now is to include the country table to replace the country ID. I go through the same procedure as with the location table. An inner join. This time I just need the country name. The next step is to create a query for the employees who occupy the selected department. For this page we need the employee name and their job. I right-click the last step and repeat the same process as with the departments query. The name is Employees. The table is Employees and I select all of the columns. In this case we need a filtered query. After all, we only need to show the employees within the chosen department. Under the Condition tab, I choose the department ID. This ID needs to be the same value as the value that is contained in the get variable called filter. All that is left now is to interjoin the jobs table so that we can show the job title instead of the ID. The last steps will populate the details page. Here we see that all of the employees table fields are required. This also means that we need to replace the IDs for job, manager, and department. The first query is for the employee. This is a single query because there will only be one chosen employee. The previous query was named employees. I can therefore give this query the singular form called employee. The table is the employees table. I select all of the columns. For the condition, I select the employee ID to be the same as the get filter. I hear you saying, but we have already used this variable for the department. True. The value of the filter lasts as long as the page is open. When I open another page, the value of the filter disappears. In other words, it can be given a different value and in this case it will be the ID of the chosen employee. At this stage I could create inner joins for job, manager, and department like I did for the two previous queries. In this case I have chosen to create individual queries. This option is available because there is just the one employee as opposed to multiple employees in the previous query. So, here goes. These are all single queries. The name is the singular form of the table name. We need the title. The condition is that the ID is the same as the ID in the employee table. I have sped the video up to spare you the monotony of repeating actions. The following queries follow the exact same steps as the job query. And that concludes the backend activities. I save the file, close the workflows panel and close the file. These are no longer required. Yeah. We are ready to create the front end. For this I go to the Site Manager. If you are not using Node.js as the server model, you will see different content in the project folder. Don't worry, the actions will be much the same. I choose static files so that you can follow, even if you have a different server model. When I click the plus button, the Page Properties dialog pops up. Again, this may be different if the server model is not Node.js. Here I enter the file name without the extension. If you have set the project settings up properly, this will create a Bootstrap 5 HTML page. Inside the page, I create the usual: a container, a row and a column. Inside the column, I add the page heading. After the row, I add another row. I adjust the margin to get a proper separation between the rows. Inside the row, I add, you guessed it, a column. Inside the column, I add a card. As a side note, I love cards. First, I remove the image placeholder and the anchor button. Then I add a card heading before the card body. I then move the card title inside the card heading. After the card body, I add a card footer. I remove all of the padding from the footer. Inside the footer, I add a button. I change the button text. Give the button an identifiable ID. Change the button property so that it occupies the whole footer. I am nearly there. The card takes its width from the column width. I could change the column width using the conventional method. For this exercise, I have chosen to use row columns. Setting this determines the number of columns per physical row. I should also set the gutter size, but I will leave this till later so that you can see the effect. That is it for the layout of the departments page. I save the file. The employees page is very similar to the departments page. To save time, I will clone the departments page. To do this, I hover over the index page and choose the pencil icon. This opens Page Properties dialog. I enter the name of the page that I want to create and save. A word of warning when using this method using the current version of Wappler. What has happened is that I have renamed the original index page. If I did not have the index page open in the canvas, I would have lost the index page. In this case, all I have to do is resave the index page and all is well. It is important to note that this method is an unintended consequence. But it does save time. I open the new page and make the necessary changes. The heading for 1. Next, I create an area for the back button. I do this by adding a second column to the first row. Inside the column, I add a button and change the button text. I give the button a recognizable ID and change the style. I reposition the button. First horizontally centered and then move to the right. Lastly, I change the column width to accommodate a long heading. The only thing that remains is to change the text of the Go to button. That is it for the employees page, so I save it. The details page is cloned from the employees page using the same method as before. And I did not forget to resave the employees page. I open the new page. This is a reminder of what the page should look like. A single card without a footer. Back in Wappler, I start with the page heading. Then I remove the card footer. I change the column to 6 calls wide. Then I select the row and change the number of columns to 1. While here, I also center the column. I save the file. And that is it for the details page. I will now bind the data to the departments page. First I need a data source in the form of Server Connect. I right-click, App. In the dialog, I choose Data and Server Connect. I give the Server Connect a recognizable ID. For the server action I choose the server action that I created earlier on. There is no filter on this data source, so I leave it blank. Next, I select the second row and attach a repeat children area to it. I give the repeat an ID. For the expression I choose departments within the Server Connect. When I refresh the page, we see the result. We now have a card for each department. You may have noticed that there is no gap between the vertical cards. This is where I show you the effect of a gutter. I scroll a long way down in the Properties panel to where the gutter properties are. Here I set the vertical gutter to 4. Needless to say, that the result is much more pleasing. I suppose I could have had the same result if I had attached a bottom margin of 4 to the column. This is a matter of personal choice. Next, I select the card title and go down to Dynamic Attributes. Clicking on Dynamic Attributes shows a dialog where I select Display and Inner Text. Under Dynamic Attributes, I need to enter the value of the inner text. Clicking on the lightning bolt pops a dialog up which shows the possible dynamic data that can be used. In our case, I need to choose the department name from the repeat region. When I select the department name, the card titles magically show the names of the departments. I find the titles to be on the large side. I change the title to an H5. In the card body, I need 4 paragraphs to display the location of the department. I duplicate the paragraph a number of times to give me the required number. I then select the first paragraph and go down to Dynamic Attributes. In the pop-up, I select Display and Inner Text. For the value, I select the street address. I repeat this process for each of the other 3 paragraphs, each time selecting the relevant value. I adjust the bottom margin for the paragraphs. This is starting to look great. Actually, styling should have been outside the scope of this topic. But I found it important to create a real application rather than just the mechanics behind master detail pages. Having said that, I have noticed that the cards are not of the same length. To fix this, I select the card and go down to Appearance. Here I set the height of the card to 100%. This sets the card height to the available space which, in turn, is set to the tallest card. I will now take a break while I speed the video up, during which I add some more styling. Now for the Go To button. The idea is, when the button is clicked on, the user will be taken to the employees page for the selected department. For this, I need to include the browser component. I right-click Server Connect. In the dialog, I choose Component and Browser. I adjust the ID. I then select the Go To button and in the Properties panel I go down to Dynamic Events. In the pop-up, I select Mouse and click. For the action, I select Browser Go To. I then click on the folder icon to choose the page in the pop-up. The Employees page needs to know the department that has been chosen in order to show the employees for that department. This is done using what is called a URL parameter. To add a URL parameter to a link, a question mark is added, followed by a variable name. The variable then needs to have a value added to it for it to be of any use. I add an equal sign and the department ID as a dynamic value. The department ID is obtained from the row repeat region. That finishes this page off and can now save it for the last time. For the Employees page, we need to see the employees for the department that is shown in the URL parameter. To obtain the value of the URL parameter, I select App and click the Define Query Params button. In the pop-up, I add a variable name. This name is the same as we used in the link in the departments page, namely ID. Now I can add the data source in the form of Server Connect. I give the Server Connect a recognizable ID. The server action is the one that I created earlier on. The filter is the value of the URL variable. I add a repeat children to the row containing the card. I give it an ID. For the expression, I select Employees from that Server Connect. I save the file and refresh the page. I am now faced with a dilemma. The value of the URL variable is empty with the result that the page does not show any employees. I guess that I could turn the dynamic view off, but that shows the one card. What I will do is to remove the variable from the filter and replace it with the ID of one of the department. In this case, it is the sales department which has an ID of 8. Now when I save and refresh the page, I see the cards for the employees in the sales department. I now replace the card title with the name of the employee. For this, I select the title and go down to Dynamic Attributes. Here I select Display in Inner Text. For the value, I select both first and last name from the repeat area. The next step is to show the job title. Select the paragraph. Under Dynamic Attributes, I once again select Inner Text. For the value, I select the job title, also from the repeat area. At this stage, I speed the video up while I add a bit of color. Now for the link for the Go To button. First I add the browser component. Then under Dynamic Events, I mouse on Click Event. The action is the browser Go To. The URL is the details page with the addition of the URL parameters. The variable will once again be the ID with a value of employee ID. I add a gutter to enhance the layout. Before I forget, I need to change the data source filter to the URL variable. Last of all, I add a mouse on click event to the back button. The action is to use the browser go to the departments page. A last couple of adjustments are required to finish the page off. I change the card heading to an H5. In case the cards differ in height, I add a height of 100% to the card. I now save the page for the last time. Wow, this is a marathon run for me. Fortunately, we have arrived at the last page. Here I define the query parameter to ensure that I can pick up the ID of the employee. I set the variable to ID in keeping with the URL from the employee's page. Then I include a data source by going to Data and Server Connect. As usual, give the data source an ID. The server action is the one that I created earlier. The data is filtered on the URL query. But I will not do that at this stage. Instead, I will show an employee with the ID of 108. This will show the data as it would in the real scenario. I now change the card title to show the name of the employee. For this I go down to Dynamic Attributes, Display, Enter Text. For the value I choose the first and last names of the employee. Remember that this is a single query, so it does not require a repeat region. Refreshing the page shows the employee name. For the details, I first remove the paragraph. Then I add a Bootstrap 5 table from the Generators tab. The table is populated by the employee's data source. I want the headings on the left and the data on the right. This makes it a vertical table type. I make it responsive and small. The employee details are now visible in the card body. I still need to make a few changes. I add ID to the employee table heading. I change the first name heading to full name. In the data cell I add the last name. The last name row is no longer relevant, so delete it. The email and phone number look okay. The date needs to be properly formatted. The job title is obtained from the data source. The salary is converted into currency. The manager and the department are both obtained from the data source. I add a bit of color. The back button requires the browser component to be included. When going back to the Employees page, we need to add the department ID to the URL. Last of all, I changed the filter to the URL query variable. I now save this file for the last time. This video has shown more than just the dynamic master detail pages. My intention was to show a complete application. There is still more that can be done, like applying styling and catering for other screen sizes. If you have queries regarding this how-to, please note them below and I will try to accommodate them. In the meantime, I hope that this video has been of use. I will be producing more videos like this. So, subscribe and be notified of new productions. Thank you for watching. I am pretty tired. I think that I will go home now.